As I know that many people don't remember their very first Christmas that they ever celebrated, but I have the unique experience of being very present at my first Christmas, and I recall it in great detail. And the story of that has really shaped the meaning of Christmas for myself and my family, and I want to share that story with you all today. As many of you here may know, I came to Canada with my parents when I was 6 years old. As I was thrusted into a completely new environment and culture and couldn't speak the language of those around me, I felt lonely and isolated at the beginning. However, things quickly changed when one day a girl in my class named Madeline asked me if she wanted to play with her at recess, and this was at the beginning of first grade. I said yes, and Madeline and I quickly became good friends. We soon became inseparable at school, and even after school, she would be picked up by her grandma, and they would invite me over to her house for play dates. And we would spend hours playing with board games and dolls. And so, after I had a friend, time went by a lot quicker, and soon the holiday season was upon us. Now, Christmas isn't a public holiday in China, where I came from with my family, and nor is it commonly celebrated, even though it's gaining popularity these days. And so that's why I was quite confused at school while we were coloring, these pictures, particularly of a deer that looked like it had a big mosquito bite on its nose. And also, I couldn't understand why everyone had so much respect for the bearded man with the big tummy who had the audacity to steal candy or cookies from kids. But I didn't mind because at school we all had a lot of candy and snacks, and we were always singing songs, although I didn't know a lot of the words. One snowy December evening, there was a knock at our front door. When we went to open it, we saw my friend Madeline and her grandmother with two big boxes. When we opened the boxes and looked inside, there was a Christmas tree set along with decorations. My parents and I were so touched by this wonderful surprise. While the adults were chatting, Madeline and I started assembling the tree. We put all of the branches level by level, wound the tinsel and the lights around and around, and hung the ornaments piece by piece. At this point, I thought we were done, but Madeline told me that the very last step is to put the angel on top of the tree. She said that they had a star on top of their tree at home, but the angel is perfect for me because my name is Angie. And after we finished putting up the tree, all of us stood around it and marveled at how beautiful it was. And my parents and I were just so filled with appreciation and warmth, not just because of this gift that we had received, but because we had been shown the meaning of Christmas: friendship, kindness, and joy. My parents and I wanted to show our gratitude to Madeline and her grandma, as well as share a piece of our culture with them. And so Christmas isn't celebrated in China, but the winter solstice is. And so the next week, we invited Madeline and her grandma over for dinner to celebrate the winter solstice with us. Among the many Chinese dishes that my mom prepared, two were special for the occasion. The first one was tanyuan, which are sweet rice balls made of glutinous flour, sometimes filled with different types of filling, and always served in hot broth. And the roundness of the rice balls symbolize harmony, reunion, and family in Chinese. The second special dish were jiaozi, or also known as dumplings. And of course, dumplings are eaten all year round, special occasion or not. But the origin of dumplings go back more than 1,000 years. It was said that on one winter night, around the time of the winter solstice, a famous physician of Chinese traditional medicine was returning home in advance of the new year. When he reached his hometown, he was disheartened to see many, many impoverished people starving and suffering from frostbitten ears. So the physician decided to build a shed and set up a cauldron. And inside the cauldron, he prepared a stew of simmering lamb, pepper, and a lot of cold-dispelling herbs. And then he scooped up the minced stew into some pastry and then folded it up into the shape of an ear, forming dumplings. And so after he had fully cooked the dumplings, the physician distributed one bowl of soup along with 2 dumplings to each patient, and after the patients finished the soup as well as the dumplings, their frostbitten ears were healed. And so the physician decided to continue this practice into the new year when the weather became more mild. To commemorate this wise and compassionate physician, eating dumplings has become a tradition in China to celebrate the winter solstice and the new year. And this was the tradition my family and I shared with Madeline and her grandma that winter solstice many, many years ago. And so as you can see, my very first and very special Christmas was celebrated with my family, with new friends, and a mixture of 2 very different cultures. At the end of the school year, unfortunately, Madeline and I parted ways because we both moved to different schools. As addresses and phone numbers changed, unfortunately, we both lost touch. However, what has been constant over these years is the Christmas tree we put up every December, the same one gifted to us by Madeline and her grandma. And I don't know where my friend is now, but I still miss her, and I am still very, very grateful to her for her friendship, as well as for showing my family and I the meaning of Christmas. And I hope that when she goes to Chinese restaurants and orders dumplings, she is reminded of me and the Chinese tradition of the winter solstice. Thank you.
What is Christmas exactly? Is it the celebration of a child born many, many years ago? Or is it the celebration of every child ever born? Or is it a pagan ritual that was designed to shorten those long winter nights? No matter what culture you're in, there seems to be some version of this Christmas tradition. It doesn't have to be a Christmas tradition, a winter holiday of some sort. And what is tradition but a framework for the generations to share what they've always shared? The thoughts are bouncing around in my head like the Grinch on Christmas Eve. I thought it was like a kaleidoscope. Everyone's Christmas is so very different from someone else's. It's like a glimpse from this and a memory from that, a story someone told you, a Christmas carol, a movie you saw, a book you read the night before Christmas. All of these were little slivers that form our own personal view of Christmas. One of my fondest memories was when I was a very small child, and I would try to keep up with my father's giant footsteps through the woods when we would go in the very deep, to me, snow to try and find a Christmas tree. Now, Dad never wanted to bring down a beautiful tree, so what he'd end up doing is taking down 2 scrawny, horrible-looking trees, take them home to his workshop and start his drilling and replacing and building, and we usually ended up with a tree, not necessarily a very pretty tree, but it was a tree that we all loved anyway, and our cheeks were cold and there was hot chocolate when we got home, so we were pretty happy. The other thing I always remembered as the start of the Christmas season was my parents shared the driving duties of a 54-passenger school bus that they owned. And we would set up an assembly line in our kitchen every year to make goodie bags for all the kids on the bus. And we'd have one person on mandarin oranges, some on nuts, the kind you need a nutcracker for. We'd have hard candies, ribbon candies. Sometimes we had homemade fudge and popcorn balls. And at the end, we'd have 54 perfectly matched bags of candy that were handed out on the day before the break for Christmas. That, for me, was the beginning of Christmas. I've always enjoyed giving gifts more than receiving them. I could tell you gifts I've made for people all along, but I can hardly remember some of the gifts I've received. Only trouble with the fact is of my giving gifts is I like to make them, and I'm really not that talented. But over the years, I have made some very interesting gifts. One year for my children, I made a dollhouse that I snuck out night after night to my neighbor's workshop to build while they were sleeping, and made the house itself and all the furniture and the drapes and the curtains. And another year, when I was very broke, I wrote Christmas-themed stories for my nieces and nephews, starring them and their friends in various adventures. One year we made applehead dolls. My kids were in grade 1 and 3, I think, and they'd learned to make these little rocking chairs out of clothespins, and they were making apple heads. So I sewed little dresses for these grannies and bonnets and fashioned the little wire frame glasses and gave them away for Christmas. And a few years later, my daughter said to my mother, "Grandma, looks like your apple head could use a replacement. That's looking pretty beat up." And my mom said, "You didn't make these." We didn't know whether to be insulted or flattered. She thought we had actually bought them. When the early married years were best for me, because my husband and I would sit and put together the toys for the kids, and putting together those Fisher-Price villages and playing with those weebles that wobbled all over the place made us children again too, and we'd be laughing away on the floor and anticipating the joy on their faces in the morning. The fun thing for us on Christmas Eve when I was a kid was that my parents would invite their friends, and all those friends would bring their children, and we'd have this house full of people. Every surface had some sort of snack or treat. We had store-bought crackers and kubassaw and cheddar cheese of all kinds, and my mother, who baked all year round, would have baked everything you could imagine: butter tarts and mince pies and cookies galore and squares till we were... And then a lot of them were things that we'd already been sampling out of the freezer. I mean, stealing, but... And it was always a great joy on our face to see Mom open it up and go, "You kids!" Half-empty Tupperware containers. There was always plenty. In the midsummer, she'd find us whining out there in the strawberry patch about having to pick wild strawberries, and she'd say, "You're going to appreciate this on Christmas morning on your waffles." And we did. We really did. And to this day, come Christmas morning, I think of wild strawberries every Christmas morning. Then came the divorce years, and they were pretty hard on everybody. Parents missed their kids, kids missed their parents. No one was happy. No one could be with everyone at once. Those long winter drives on treacherous roads, they were just exhausting. Eventually, we came to name a day for Christmas as opposed to trying to have Christmas on Christmas Day, because those gifts given at a distance just lacked the pizzazz of seeing their faces and the joy that whatever we had given them brought. And so after we did that, it was a lot better. People were happier with the fact that we were having Christmas, and to this day I couldn't tell you if it was actually on the 25th of December or the 29th. It just didn't make any difference. One lonely year, I was all alone for Christmas, and my dog and I, Izzy, it was a day like this, a gorgeous day, and we walked on Nose Hill, and I thought, oh, it's going to be the worst Christmas of my life being alone. And there were a couple tears maybe, but that day ended up being peaceful somehow. There was no drama. It was just her and me, and it was a beautiful day. Later, and actually for a long time now, I've been a grandmother for 24 years, so I was very fortunate that way. And when the boys got a little bit older into their teenage years and were slightly less interested in singing, Deck the Halls with Grandma, I got another one. So now I still have the young child Christmas going on, and I feel deeply blessed. We have to remember that for everyone, Christmas isn't always a wonderful life. Sometimes it's a home alone, and sometimes it's the nightmare before Christmas. And no matter what your traditions are, and however you're planning, what kind of messy or mundane celebrations you have planned for this year, we all need a little hope. And to me, that's what Christmas brings. It's the hope that the light will return, and it's the hope that those sugar plums will dance through our heads with visions of better days. And could we all find a little joy this Christmas? And in the words of Timmy, God bless us, everyone.
Gal.
Fire log tender.
Fire log. There you go. All right. So long ago, in a far-off land in the mountains of Tyrol, there lived a cobbler who had 3 sons. Fritz, Franz, and Hans. Can you say that? Fritz, Franz, and Hans, because you're going to have to help me keep track. He was a happy fellow, that cobbler, even though he had fallen on hard times. And that was when the mother of the boys passed away, and he was left with their care, all by himself. But care for his children he did. If he went out and he got work, with the farmer he brought them home milk. If he got work with the butcher, he brought home meat, and he would cook up a fine supper for Fritz, friends, and Hans. And he was a jolly fellow, as I said, and he would put the food upon the table, and he would say, "Ho, ho, and now we eat. Schnitzel, schnitzel, and schnitzel," he would say to Fritz, friends, and Hans. And they would eat until their tummies were full. But then there came a desperate year. March tramped on the heels of April. Even summer was hard, for there was war in the land. And yes, there were fruit and berries to eat, but the fathers were taken away to serve in the war, leaving the women and children in the village. And no one had any money to pay to have their shoes repaired. Times were difficult. And then came fall. September tramped on October, October tramped on November. And by the time December came, Fritz, Franz, and Hans said, "What sort of Christmas will we have?" And it had been a long time since their father had said, "Tonight we have schnitzel, schnatzel, and schnitzel, Fritz, Franz, and Hans." They wondered what they would do. Christmas Eve, their father had good news. He said, "The army is coming into the village, and the soldiers will need their boots repaired. I will do it for free because they cannot afford it, and they are fighting for our country. But the general, he will have money, and surely he will pay." And so off he went with all of his cobbler's tools. And the last thing he said to his sons, Fritz, Franz, and Hans, was, "Latch the door. Take these few sticks and put them on the fire to keep the fire burning all night long. And do not answer the door. And curl up on the bed and wait for me to return." And so that's what the boys did. They latched the door, they built the fire, and they curled up under a rather meager blanket upon the bed. And the mountain wind, well, it began to sing at the door, and it sang of mountain meadows and flowers. But then the wind began to howl, and it howled of cold nights and blizzards, and it banged upon the door, bang, bang. And the boys said, "There must be someone at the door. That can't be the wind." But they remembered their father told them, "Do not answer the door." But Fritz went to the window, and there at the door he could see a wee man. And without thought he opened the door, and in came that little wee man. And he was furiously angry. He came in stomping his feet, shaking the snow off his back, and he commanded the boys. He said, "Build up the fire." They explained they only had a few twigs left to burn. He said, "Well then, where's your hospitality? Give me something to eat." And they said that the pot was empty. He went over to the pot and tipped it right upside down, and he said, "You boys, you have eaten all of the food, few sticks to burn. Let us gather under the blanket for some warmth." But the wee man, who wore a red peaked cap and had a great bulbous nose, he was all elbows and knees and sharp, sharp corners, and on that wee bed under that meager cover, he pushed and pulled, and he stole the covers for himself. And then he kicked Fritz right out of the bed, and he said to the boy, commanding him, he said, "Boy, turn cartwheels." And as if by magic, the boy began to turn over and over, and as he did, oranges fell from his pockets all over the floor. They were astounded. And then the wee man in his angry voice said to Franz, "You, out of bed, you turn cartwheels." And he began to do so. Christmas buns covered with icing fell from his pockets, and candies, such richness. And then the wee man kicked the wee boy out, Fritz, Franz, and hands out of the bed, and his brother said, "He's too small to turn cartwheels." And the wee man said, "Well then, hold him upside down and shake him hard." And they did, and gold and silver coins fell from the little boy's pockets. And the boys began to gather up the coins, and when they turned to thank the wee man, he was gone from the room. Well, they gathered up the oranges and placed them on the table in a wooden bowl, and the Christmas buns upon a platter, and the coins in the coin jar in the corner. And then they snuggled under the blanket to wait for their father's return. Finally, in the door he came on Christmas morning, and he brought with him milk and crusty loaves of bread and meat for their supper. And so they cooked, and they got to hear their father say, "Ho, ho, we have a feast tonight, for tonight we have schnitzel, schnatzel, and schnitzel for Fritz, Franz, and Hans, and we welcome the Christ child to our table. We welcome the stranger to our table to share our blessings of Christmas." And the boys told their father that they had opened the door, and they told him of the furious wee man who had come in to share the treasures. Their father said, "Oh my, you have had a visit from King Laureate, king of the trolls. He lives beneath the mountain where they mine gold and silver. And he has a much beloved daughter. For his daughter, he grows a rose garden, and around the garden there are crystals. In the mountains, in the evening, when the sun begins to set, that crystal light of pink shines over the mountains, and we call it the alpenglow. So you, my sons, have had a remarkable Christmas because of a visit from King Laureate, king of the dwarves." And that's the story of Fritz, Franz, and Hans.
Awesome.